In ninth grade, in biology class, we had the usual dissection of fetal pigs, and I took the remains of that home and kept the skeleton of it.
A gruesome story leads off our newscast.
Milwaukee police found body parts in a north side apartment, and now they wonder if they've uncovered some kind of death factory.
One of the country's most prolific serial killers.
The Jeffrey Dahmer.
Jeffrey Dahmer.
Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer and cannibal.
The dust had settled in one of the most gut-wrenching cases in America. That was the moment the infamous Milwaukee cannibal, Jeffrey Dahmer, was sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences February 1992. He was locked up in the Columbia Correctional Institute. The victims and their families could at least take some form of respite knowing that he'd suffer for long, or so they thought. Just over 2 years into his sentence, on the morning of the 28th of November, 1998, Dahmer and 2 other inmates walked into the toilet block for cleaning duties. Dahmer and one of the other inmates never walked out. What had just happened here? And who was the third inmate who walked out undetected by the guards? Backstory. To have been convicted of 15 counts of first-degree murder and receive a sentence of over 900 years in prison, one can only imagine the things Jeffrey Dahmer must have done. If there's one thing we can be sure of sometimes when the law is involved, it's that the consequence is usually commensurate with the crime. And you'll find that in Jeffrey's case as well. Jeffrey committed his first murder when he was 18. He had been driving when 19-year-old Stephen Hicks, who was heading to a rock concert at Chippewa Lake Park, Ohio, decided to hitchhike with him. As they drove, Jeffrey brought up the idea of Stephen going with him to his house to have a few drinks. After drinking, Stephen told Jeffrey that he wanted to leave, but Jeffrey didn't want him to. It turned out that Jeffrey was hoping he would act on his feelings for Stephen. Seeing as he couldn't stop Stephen from leaving, Jeffrey used a 10-pound dumbbell to strike Stephen twice in the back of his head. As soon as Stephen passed out, Jeffrey used the bar of the dumbbell to strangle him. The next day, Jeffrey dismembered Stephen's corpse and buried the parts of his body in his backyard. But because he didn't want to leave evidence behind, he dug up Stephen's body weeks after, peeled the flesh off the bones, and dissolved the flesh in acid. He then flushed the output down the toilet before crushing the bones with a sledgehammer and spreading them around his backyard. After Jeffrey killed Stephen, he went on to kill his next 4 victims: 25-year-old Stephen Twomey, 14-year-old James Dockstader, 22-year-old Richard Guerrero, and 24-year-old Anthony Sears. This was between 1987 and 1988. In the years 1989 and 1991, Jeffrey met and murdered his remaining 12 victims, and his last victim was 25-year-old Joseph Bredhoft. Jeffrey's MO for all of his victims were in this order: strangulation, dismemberment, and decapitation of their heads. But as they say, everything has an end. In Jeffrey's case, he just wasn't expecting it.